When the older Chassidim spoke about the Alter Rebbe, they would count 10 things as 10 schusim of the Alter Rebbe, 10 merits. And they would say there are 10 things which are the Yisurim of the Alter Rebbe, 10 things where the Alter Rebbe went through suffering and pain. The 10 schusim they counted. The first thing is the writing of the Shulchan Aruch. The second thing is the Siddur that the Alter Rebbe composed. The third thing is the improvements the Alter Rebbe made in regards to mikveh. The fourth thing is the improvements the Alter Rebbe made in regards to the knife that's used for shechita. The fifth thing is spreading the teachings of Chassidus. The sixth thing is supporting the families that lived in Eretz Yisrael. The seventh is the Alter Rebbe sitting in jail and being freed. The eighth chus is that his Sfarim, his writings, were accepted in the whole world, like the Sfarim of the early Go'enim, the Torah geniuses of the early generations, and he was given the title of Rav. The ninth chus are the 10 Negurim that the Alter Rebbe composed, which brought so many to tshuva. And the 10th chus is his bracha, that every effort that will be made in the area, in the direction of strengthening Torah and mitzvahs, will be successful. One will become 1,000. The 10 Yisurim of the Alter Rebbe, the 10 areas of suffering, they counted number 1, the suffering involved with his journey to Mizrich. Number 2 and number 3 are the 2 times that the tzaddik, the Baal HaFlor, had resentment towards the Alter Rebbe. Number 4 is the opposition of his friends, the Go'enim of Shklov, the Torah geniuses of Shklov. They were against him for going to Mizrich. Number 5, the difficulty he had in regards to making a decision about the dinim in his Shulchan Aruch. Number 6, the complaints from the older students of the Maggid, and especially the Baruch Mezhebusha, about his Shita of Chassidus Chabad. Number 7, the pain that he had in his debates with the Misnagdim. Number 8, the complaints the Alter Rebbe had from the tzaddikim of Volin for not wanting to participate in what they wanted to do, which is an excommunication against the Misnagdim. Number 9, the labor involved in supporting the family that were in Eretz Yisrael. And number 10, the complaints from the tzaddik, the Shlomo Kalina, for the Alter Rebbe being against Napoleon. One of the things we mentioned before in the 10 chusim were the 10 negunim of the Alter Rebbe. It is known that the Alter Rebbe composed 10 negunim, which with these negunim the Alter Rebbe brought so many to tshuva and brought so many people to come closer to Chassidus Chabad and brought them to a deeper emotion and deeper feeling of connection to Hashem. The 10 negunim are, first of all, the first one is the nigun that's called the Alter Rebbe's nigun. And of all the 10 negunim, this nigun stands out. And sometimes it's called the Alter Rebbe's nigun. Sometimes it's called the nigun of the Dalet Bovis, or the 4 parts. But this nigun is exceptional. The Alter Rebbe composed it with a lot of spiritual depth behind it, and it's sung only at special occasions. It's not sung in ordinary circumstances. At the end of the last days of Yom Tov, on Purim, Yitzis Kislev, Yud Tammuz, at a wedding, at a bar mitzvah, and similar occasions. The Rebbe Rashab once said that this nigun, the 4 parts of the nigun, correspond to the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah. And they correspond to the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Yud Kei, Vav Kei. And they correspond to the 4 dimensions of the Neshama, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya. In fact, there were times where they would sing this nigun, And the Rebbe Marash, as they were singing, they would hear him saying, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. And there were times when they heard him say, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya. And there were times when they heard him say, Yudke, Vavke. In other words, depending on what the situation was, that was what the Rebbe Marash was saying, because the nigun included in all these different things. And it's understood from the Sichos of the Rabbeim that this nigun of the Alter Rebbe has in it tremendous power to help a person both spiritually and also in physical things and personal things, providing that one sings the nigun in the appropriate time and with the appropriate spiritual preparation. By Fabrengens with the Rebbe always instructs that before singing the Alter Rebbe's nigun, we should sing a Hachana nigun. And basically it's the same nigun that it's always sung as a preparation for the Alter Rebbe's nigun. And after singing the Alter Rebbe's nigun, the Rebbe always instructs that we should sing the nigun of Nezheri Techlopti, the nigun of the Mittel Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe's nigun itself, there are times where the Rebbe indicates that the last part should be repeated 10 times by lifting 10 fingers. Sometimes the Rebbe lifts 3 fingers to indicate it should be repeated only 3 times. And then there are times we just lift 1 finger to show that it should just be sung 1 time. It's the Minik Chabad that this is the nigun that is sung at a chuppah, the chosn and the kala march down to the chuppah with the Alter Rebbe's nigun. Then there are the other 9 nigunim that the Alter Rebbe composed. The nigun of Ka'ayol Tareg Alafike Moyim, V'hoyel Tetofes Beinei Necha. There's the nigun of Keliata V'yedeka. The nigun of Tzenor Re'ena. The nigun of Koil Deidi Deifek. The nigun of Avinu Malkeinu. The nigun of Lecha Deidi. Then there's a nigun without words that Alter Rebbe composed for davening on Shabbos. And the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe were known to have davened with this nigun. Then there's a nigun Dveikas Alter Rebbe composed for the davening of Rosh Hashanah. And then there's a nigun of Bnei Hecholah. All these nigunim were composed by the Alter Rebbe when he was still in Mizrich. However, later, when the Alter Rebbe became a Rebbe, he perfected them. And one of the things we can see, how much emphasis the Alter Rebbe put on nigunim, that through this we can serve Hashem, was when the Alter Rebbe came back from Mizrich. Naturally, there was a big commotion in his city of Vitebsk, and people surrounded him with questions. Why did you go? What did you need this for? What did you get there? The Alter Rebbe answered, I got 3 things there. I now know what is Hashem, what are Yidden, Yisrael, Ereita, the Kuchabricha Kulachad, and what is a nigun. The Frierdiker Rebbe also related that one time, it was Yitzhak Kislev, in the year Tov Reish Samach Gimel, 1903, 1902, because it was a winter. And he said this was a scene that one should never forget, that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, stood up, full height, and he said, all of us, Chassidei Chabad, have to give a special thanks to the Eibishter for the schus that we have a connection to the Rebbe, meaning the Alter Rebbe, and that through this we're connected to Ein Sof Shel Chochmah V'Atzilus, the infinite light of Hashem in Chochmah V'Atzilus. And with the nigunim of the Rebbe, meaning the Alter Rebbe, we will go and greet Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. And now we'll talk a little bit about the picture of the Alter Rebbe. Everyone knows there's a picture of the Alter Rebbe. And sometimes pictures from a long time ago, people question how accurate it is. But this picture of the Alter Rebbe is as accurate as could be. The Frierdiker Rebbe relates the story of how there is a picture of the Alter Rebbe and how this picture reached us. And he says that he heard the story from a chassid called Alter Rebbe. And he told him that in the winter of Tafresh Tezvav, which is 1854, it was the month of Kislev, the Tzemach Tzedek received word from the minister in Vitebsk that he'd like him to come to a meeting. The meeting is going to take place in Petersburg with other Jewish leaders, and he wanted Tzemach Tzedek to be there as well. The subject matter was about Jewish books being printed with German translation so that children could study in them. Being that Tzemach Tzedek was at previous meetings, he'd like him to be at this meeting as well. The Tzemach Tzedek had no desire to attend this meeting. He also was feeling weak. So at the time that he got this letter, there was a very famous doctor, Dr. Heibenthal, that was not far from Lubavitch. He was actually visiting someone. So he asked him to come and also see the Tzemach Tzedek. He came to the Tzemach Tzedek, examined him, and then he wrote a note that the Tzemach Tzedek, the health is weak, and he shouldn't travel until the spring. The Tzemach Tzedek sent 2 shluchim to bring this document to the minister, and to also tell him that if he'd agreed that 2 people should come as representatives of the Tzemach Tzedek, he will send 2 people. A short while later, they received word from the minister that it's okay to send 2 people representing the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Tzemach Tzedek sent the Rebbe Maharash and this chassid, the Rabbanim Berlinicha. The Rabbanim Berlinicha said that when we came to Petersburg, we attended the meetings, and I noticed there was one person there, one of the members of the government, that he had a liking to the Rebbe Maharash, and he gave him a lot of honor. At one point when there was a break between the meetings, there were 5 meetings, and after the 4th meeting there was a break of 5 days before they met again. So this person from the government that I noticed was giving so much honor to the Rebbe Maharash. During this break, he walked over to the Rebbe Maharash, and he said to him, "I'd like to really speak to you. Could you make me an appointment?" And the Rebbe Maharash designated a time that they could meet. They met, and they spoke for over 2 hours, and I was quite concerned, Rabbanim Berlinicha said, what was going on. But later the Rebbe Maharash told me that all he wanted was to make a picture, to draw a picture of me. He told me that he's an artist, and he loves art, and he inherited this from his father. His father, in fact, has a big collection of art, and he wanted to make a picture, draw a picture of my face. He told me that in the art collection of his father, there's a picture of a Jewish rabbi. He said it was one of the big rabbis that was accused of rebelling against the government. And his grandfather, his father's father, was the chief investigator. And he ordered that they make a picture, they draw a picture of the accused rabbi. After the case was over, his grandfather took the picture for himself. And now this picture is in the art collection of the family. So the Rebbe Maharash asked him if it would be possible to see that picture. They designated a time when he was off from work. It was on a Wednesday, and we went to see his art collection. We were both stunned when we saw the face of an Ish Elokim, a godly face. And underneath the picture, it had explicitly the Alter Rebbe's name and his father's name, and that he's from the city of Lozhna. And the date on the picture was 1798, which is the exact time that the Alter Rebbe was in jail. When the Rebbe Maharash came back to Lubavitch, he told the Tzemach Tzedek about the picture, and the Tzemach Tzedek wanted very much to see this picture. So a few years later, in the year Tafresh Yutes, when the Rebbe Maharash traveled again to Petersburg, Tzemach Tzedek told him that he should make every effort to find this person who has the picture and to buy it for him. even if it would cost 1,000 rubles. And if he can't get the original, he should at least get a copy. The Rebbe Marash spent over a month in Peterburg searching for this person, but he couldn't find him. And naturally, the Tzemach Tzedek had a lot of tar from this. 2 years later, the Rebbe Marash again to Peterburg, and this time it was his brother of Chaim Shneur Zalman. And when they were there, they met a professor whom they knew, Professor Bertenzon, and they told him the story of this man with the picture and his art collection, and they asked him to use his resources to try to find out where this person is. A few months later, after they returned to Lubavitch, they received a letter from the professor that he found out where the person is and where his art collection is, and he told them how to get to him. So in the summer of Tov Reish Chov Beis, the Rebbe Maharash traveled again to Peterburg, and this time he found the person, and with great, great difficulty, he convinced him to allow him to borrow the picture just for 1 month. And of course, he had to leave with him money, and left with him 10,000 ruble as security. And he brought the picture back to the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbetzin Rivka, which is the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Marash, she said that her husband, Rebbe Marash, told her that Tzemach Tzedek is going to allow her to see the picture. And she said that for about 2 weeks, the picture was in the house of the Tzemach Tzedek. Every single day, except for Shabbos, the Rebbe Marash and the Tzemach Tzedek would lock themselves up in the room. Even the Tzemach Tzedek's Gaboyim, the assistants, weren't allowed in. Tzemach Tzedek put the picture on the table. He wore Bigdei Shabbos, the Shabbos Kahat, wore his gartel, and would stare at the picture for a long period of time. Rabbi Tzemach said that when the picture came out and was publicized later, she recognized that it was an accurate copy of the original, which she herself saw. And when she told this entire story to the Frierdiker Rebbe, she said to him that when the Tzemach Tzedek gave me permission to see the Alter Rebbe's picture, it was on the condition that no one, absolutely no one, would know about it. And the only person I told about this was your father, in other words, the Rebbe Rashab, and now by your father's instructions, I'm telling the story to you. And from this story, you also can learn the significance of a picture of a Rebbe, how powerful that is. Here the Tzemach Tzedek spent 2 weeks, where every day he would put the picture on the table, put on his Shabbazik begodim, Shabbazik hat, gartel, and stand opposite the picture and look at the picture. No more words are necessary to explain what this tells us about the picture of a Rebbe. And now to talk a little bit about the children of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had 3 sons and 3 daughters. The oldest of the Alter Rebbe's sons was the Mittel Rebbe, who became the second Rebbe of Chabad. Then there was Reb Chaim Avraham and Reb Moshe. The 3 daughters were the Rebbetzin Freda, Rebbetzin Dvoraleya, and Rochel. The details of the Mittel Rebbe will be giving over in the future lessons, being that he was the successor, the Mamala Mokim of the Alter Rebbe. Reb Chaim Avraham was a very big chassid, although he was very much a closed person and he hid his greatness. And physically, he resembled the Alter Rebbe very much. His face and the build of his body was very similar to the Alter Rebbe. And in fact, when people looked at him, it would remind them very much of the Alter Rebbe. And when the Mittel Rebbe was nostalgic, and the Chassidim came to the Tzemach Tzedek that he should become the Rebbe, he told him to go to Reb Chaim Avraham that he should become the Rebbe. Reb Chaim Avraham, on the other hand, didn't want to accept leadership, and he told the Chassidim to go to the Tzemach Tzedek. Ultimately, the Tzemach Tzedek became the third Rebbe of Chabad, and Reb Chaim Avraham, although he was older than Tzemach Tzedek, he would go to him, listen to his Maimorim, and follow his words, just like any simple chassid that the Tzemach Tzedek had. The third son of the Alter Rebbe was Reb Moshe, and he also was a very great chassid, had a brilliant mind. We spoke in one of the previous lessons how the Alter Rebbe praised him very much and spoke so highly of how talented he was. So at the end of his life, his family moved away to Eretz Yisrael, and he remained in Russia and went into Golus. He went wandering, for whatever spiritual purpose that he saw. And these last years of his life, he lived the life of a nista, of a hidden tzaddik. The story behind it is connected to an incident that happened when the king of Russia, Alexander I, visited a city near Lubavitch. This happened after the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, when the Mittel Rebbe was a Rebbe. So the Mittel Rebbe and Reb Moshe went to greet the king. Also other dignitaries went to be there, and there were the priests there, and the chief priest, the chief Galach, said something which is an offense to Reb Moshe, and an offense to Teres Moshe, to Yiddishkeit. Reb Moshe reacted very strongly and said something very sharp to the chief priest. They were very angry about that, and as a result of that, Reb Moshe had to debate with these priests. The debate took quite some time, but the Reb Moshe came out victorious. The priests were very angry that they were defeated by Reb Moshe. As a result of that, they arrested him. And they took him away to lock him up in a jail. They traveled with him. He was tied up, and he was escorted by two of the priests and a few armed soldiers. But then a miracle happened. In one of the villages where they stopped off, everybody who was escorting him fell into a very deep sleep. Reb Moshe untied himself, and he ran away. In fact, he ran for 24 consecutive hours, and that's how his life was saved. An interesting thing is that the night that this happened was actually Yitzhak Kislev, the same day that the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. From this point on, Reb Moshe lived the life of a nister and lived in the city of Pastos. The people in that city tell the story that there was an older man that came to the city, and he acted in a very strange way. He would always walk around wearing white linen garments. Even his shoes were made of linen. And he would walk around the whole town collecting donations. Also in a very strange way. He wouldn't take more than one pruta, 1 penny from a person. And he wouldn't go back to the same person until he collected from all the people in the whole shtetl. When he washed his white, clean begadim, and where he washed it, nobody knew. Most of the day he spent in the forest, in the woods. Only at night he would come back to sleep in the Hegdish, which is the building where all the beggars would sleep. And he would sleep in a very strange way. Both of his feet were tied up to the ceiling. There were some people that said that this man is not normal. And then there were some people who observed him and said that he's one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim. One time, Reb Mordechai Chernobyl was a very big Rebbe, a very big tzaddik, passed by that town, and he became ill, so he stayed over in the town, and the people from the town came to visit him. Reb Moshe was also, this old man was also one of the people that came to visit him. And when he walked in, they saw in Reb Mordechai Chernobyl that he recognized him, and he said, "Ah." And then he started to communicate in a way that nobody else understood. But it was clear that the two of them had something between them. And that reinforced the rumor that it actually is indeed one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim. Then there was a rumor that he's the Alter Rebbe's son. They knew that his name was Moshe, but nobody knew his father's name or the city where he came from. In fact, he wouldn't daven in shul. He would only hear Kedusha and Baruch Hu. When it came to Kriyas HaTorah, he would leave because he didn't want them to ask him his father's name. He didn't want to have to expose his father's name. And that's the way he lived all the time. Before his passing, they asked him to give them the name of his family so they could notify the family what had happened to him. But he said, my family won't have to be notified. They'll know themselves. So this also made it clear to them that the family were tzaddikim, and they would know about what had happened on their own. There's a chassid that wrote this story to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he writes to him that when he told this story to the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Marash testified that this man was indeed Reb Moshe, the Alter Rebbe's son. The Alter Rebbe's daughters, mentioned before, the Rebbetzin Freitke. She was a very great tzaddikus. She knew a lot of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe would teach Chassidus privately. In fact, there were times that the Mitzvah Rebbe would be hiding in the room because Alter Rebbe officially wouldn't allow him, only learn with her privately. And he would hide in the room because of his burning desire to know more Chassidus. There's a story where one time the Alter Rebbe was teaching her and explaining the garments that the Kohen Gadol wore according to Chassidus. What was the spiritual significance of each one of the garments? Only one garment he didn't explain, and that is the gatel, the belt. He didn't explain what is the significance of the belt according to Chassidus. And the Mitzvah Rebbe was in his hiding place, dying to find out what is the significance of the belt, but he couldn't speak, so he took his gatel and threw it to his sister. And she immediately understood the hint. She turned to the Alter Rebbe and asked him, please explain to me what is the spiritual significance of the gatel. And this Rebbetzin Freitke is buried in Hadich together with the Alter Rebbe. Then there's Rebbetzin Dvoraleya, which we spoke about her at length in the previous lesson. She was the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek, and she gave up her life for the Alter Rebbe. Her husband's name was Avshalom Shachner. He was the son of someone by the name of Reb Neach. Reb Neach was also a very great chassid. He was a chassid of Reb Mendel Haradaka. And Reb Mendel Haradaka went to Eretz Yisrael. 2 years later, he decided to travel there as well and to join them. But on the way, he became sick. And in those days, when someone passed away on a boat, they would just throw over the body in the river. So he begged the captain of the boat to do him a personal favor and not to do that to him, but to tie his body down to a raft, write down on a piece of paper his name, the name of his city, and his destination, and the purpose of his traveling to Eretz Yisrael, and he just put the raft on the water. Miraculously, the raft just floated to the city of Tveria. The Yidden there found the body, and they buried him, and that's where he's buried, in Tveria. The Alter Rebbe was close to the family. When he heard this story, he took in his son, who was a young child, Avshalom Shachner, and an orphan, and he raised him as his own child. And later, he married Alter Rebbe's daughter, Rebbetzin Dvoraleya. And after the Rebbetzin Dvoraleya was nostalgic, he remarried, but nevertheless, he remained very close and loyal to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe always considered him as one of his own children. Then there's a third daughter of the Alter Rebbe. Her name was Rachel. And she also passed away very young. She was married to a chassid by the name of Avram Shenis. And shortly after the marriage, she passed away. And there were no children from her. As far as the Alter Rebbe's Svarim are concerned, of course, the Alter Rebbe wrote and spoke thousands of Maimarim of Chassidus. But in terms of the Alter Rebbe's writing, what's known mostly is the Alter Rebbe's writing of Tanya. As far as Chassidus is concerned, and also the Shulchan Aruch. There are also, between the many Maimarim, there are two Svarim of the Alter Rebbe, which are called Teira and Lekuti Teira. And this is Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe on the Parsha of the week. And the Rebbe always refers to this as the Chassidische Parsha. In fact, these two Svarim are called the Teira Shebal Peh of Teira Chassidus. We explained at length that Tanya is considered the written Torah of Chassidus, and these two Svarim were called Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah of the teachings of Chassidus. So with the stalkers of the Alter Rebbe, on Chavdalet Tevis, Tov Kufay and Gimel, on this day was the completion of the first generation of Chabad, the completion of a major historic event in the history of creation. As the Rebbe explains that the Alter Rebbe in his generation was Mashiach. And what the Alter Rebbe accomplished in his lifetime was he brought the Shekhinah down from the seventh heaven to the sixth. That when Mashiach will come, the Shekhinah of Hashem will be revealed in this world, and that will bring redemption. But this Shekhinah in the Alter Rebbe's times was in the seventh heaven. And the Alter Rebbe, through his Aveda during his lifetime, brought the Shekhinah down from the seventh heaven to the sixth. And the Mitzel Rebbe from the sixth to the fifth. And every Rebbe in his generation brought it down one level. And the Rebbe says that in our generation, in other words, in the Rebbe's generation, the Shekhinah will be revealed here on earth, which will be redemption in the most physical, literal sense, going out of Golus. So the first of these 7 stages was completed through the life and the accomplishments of the Alter Rebbe.